Welcome to the Roots of Research podcast, where we go behind the scenes with the movers, shakers, and rainmakers that make Georgia Southern University so very special. I'm your host, Dr. David Weindorf, and today I have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Meimei Lin, an associate professor of geography in our School of Earth, Environment, and Sustainability. Now, Dr. Lin's academic journey began in her native China, with an undergraduate degree in ecology from Fujian Agricultural and Forestry University and a master's degree in the same field from Xiamen University. She later moved to the U.S. to complete a second master's degree in botany and her PhD in geography at Miami University in Ohio. A longtime resident of Savannah, she served on the faculty of Armstrong State University before joining Eagle Nation during the 2018 merger. She is a prolific scholar, publishing in top-tier journals across geography, finance, and urban planning. Her work, which bridges the gap between complex geospatial data and real-world solutions, is supported by competitive grants from prestigious organizations like the National Natural Science Foundation of China and the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation. Welcome to the show, Meimei.
Thank you for having me. It's truly a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's so great to have you, truly. There's an old joke that goes, geology rocks, but geography is where it's at. Right?
Right.
All right. Well, speaking of geography, on this podcast, we always start with an origin story of sorts, right? Now, you've studied everything from agricultural belts in the Midwest to coastal dynamics here in Georgia. Was there a specific moment in your journey where you realized that a map could do more than just show us where things are, but could actually tell us why a community is thriving or facing a challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. That, I think, what makes geography so fascinating is that from the beginning of my training, so I understood that geography is not just about describing places, right? It's about thinking spatially. It's not simply about locations on a map, but about like what that location reveals, right? So we ask not only what is happening, but where it is happening and why there, and what that location reveals about larger systems. So, and what makes this spatial perspective even more powerful is with the use of geospatial technology. You're probably familiar with geographic information systems, remote sensing, and spatial data science, right? So with these location-based technologies, it created this like global geographic knowledge base that shapes how we plan cities, manage resources, respond to disasters, and understand the challenges, right? And even more powerful is with the ability to actually integrate these years of survey data Landsat programs. Like we have the Landsat program dates back to 1972. So we have several decades of the satellite imagery that we can map and analyze the spatial patterns, right? And like what I always want to tell people is that a spreadsheet tells you how much land changed, but a map tells you where and why it matters, right? Exactly. So geography just kind of linking all of these together, and maps are not just like illustration, tells you where that locations are, but kind of revealing what is underneath that, why we have that patterns, what are the factors kind of driving those patterns. And I'll give two examples of my research. Like you mentioned, during my PhD, I studied the agricultural intensification across the U.S. Midwest Corn Belt. So with the GIS and remote sensing, I mapped where corn and soybean actually expansion accelerated, right? So when you map it out, you see clearly like what is going on and something happened. Like some areas, they intensify rapidly, while some other areas, it might stay relatively unchanged, right? And then when you start thinking about, okay, why there are such patterns, and you start to integrate like land suitability, commodity prices, federal biofuel policies, and my maps start to tell me like why, what is driving that patterns. And these agricultural expansion, they were not random. They follow the economic incentives, policies, and the environmental constraints. And geography made all these connections like visible, right? So you can see all those fine level variations on your map. And that's just like so powerful. The maps are not just an illustration. Again, it's processed information. It highlights like the most important patterns and what are the factors or driving underneath that,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, one of the fun things that I love to do is when I have Google Maps turned on.
Right.
I know you can turn on the background and actually look at the aerial image, and there's a way you can also go back in time, right?
Exactly.
And look at different timestamps, so you can sort of see how urban development has been occurring over time.
Right, exactly. That's again the beauty of integrating all these like many years data that we can map and analyze the dynamic processes, right? And through there we see, oh, okay, everything is changing, and you can draw like more informed information about which community might be suffering, right? So in my agricultural intensification case, I can see where counties that they might experience like this short-term economic gains, but they're also facing this long-term ecological vulnerability, right? So such information is really important for the policymakers. They look at that and then they can make more informed decisions about how we want to use all these land.
Absolutely.
And what causes there are, right? Like
I was thinking back as a soil scientist, that's my background, right?
Yes.
One of the designations we have in soil science is something called prime farmland.
Right.
And it's really the best of the best, these deep, dark, rich soils for growing crops. But some of these are found right along the perimeter of cities. So using this type of technique, geospatial technologies, we can decide how can we avoid, consuming some of those prime farmlands. Maybe we build that next road or next skyscraper on soils that are marginal for agricultural production.
Right, definitely. So that's the ability to be able to see things spatially, like what that plot is next to what, right?
Yeah.
So that is a really powerful information to know, like, okay, we want to avoid like 200 miles like outside that area, and then or we want how we can better plan that. So and then there's a lot of these spatial analysis going on into that, right? So definitely it's more than just maps, but about the having that spatial thinking. Yeah. I was also thinking about another example. So I don't know if you read about that. It's the nighttime light data that so like the satellites that during nighttime it actually still picking up the light intensities, like when we turn our lights. So we did this cool study by looking just at the nighttime light data to see where urban actually expanded, right? And then where there is new infrastructure. And we use the brightness and all these spatial configuration of the light. You can see clearly there are the transportation networks. There are industrial corridors, and there are like so many different investment patterns. And you sort of seeing like which urban systems are like expanding rapidly, and not just they were expanded, like but how fast they expanded within a certain amount of time, and that's like really fascinating. And we're able to see like, okay, so now we need to come up with a better urban planning, right, to make sure things can go more sustainably. So that's just like how I feel like geography kind of linked all of these together to make it really, really like powerful for us. Like this is processed information that we can use in the real,
fascinating
design.
stuff. That is really cool. Well, listen, I want to dig into another one of your studies. This is a more recent study, 2025. You had a paper called Rising Tides, Sinking Approval Rates, and you explore how sea level rise is already impacting the mortgage market. You found that approval rates are dropping as banks price in, essentially, future risk. So how do we ensure that this data-driven reality doesn't lead to new economic barriers for our coastal communities? And how can your maps help us navigate that?
That's a great question, actually. So that question really gets at the tension that we were trying to highlight in this paper. So what we found is that climate risk, right, particularly sea level rise, is being treated as a forward-looking financial risk rather than a future environmental concern. And even we control for like these other covariates that can impact mortgage approval rates, like income level, credit scores, loan-to-value ratios, or the past hurricane or flood events, we still found that the mortgage approval rates are lower in census tracts exposed to sea level rise. So that tells us lenders are pricing in these anticipated future risk rather than reacting to the most recent disasters. Right. So the concern, of course, is this kind of like rational, data-driven behavior can unintentionally create the new economic barriers for coastal communities, right? And from our studies that we found out that these effects are not evenly distributed.
Okay.
So areas where you have a higher concentrations of minority applicants, they experience even more pronounced decline in the mortgage approval rates. Of course, raises the equity concerns, right? So if left unchecked, this climate risk can kind of quietly translate into reduced access to credit and fewer options for people who are already having limited mobility. Right. So that's when the maps comes like essential. Like it helps these policymakers see, okay, where a problem is, right? And the way this climate risk actually translated into this financial decision making is that where that risk is located and how it is measured. So in our study, we use two spatial explicit measures. So one is by looking at whether the census tract will be inundated under 1 foot sea level rise.
Right.
And the second one is like the percentage of land area exposed to that inundation. So by mapping all these climate risks at the census tract level, really help us see these fine grain level variations across the different communities, right? So these maps help the policymakers and lenders also and the communities to kind of distinguish there are places they face more imminent, widespread exposure versus places there is the risk is more localized or uneven, right? So then they can come up with some like adaptive investment measures, like say revised underwriting standards that might account for the mitigation measure, or come up with some public programs that help offset these risks rather than just withdrawing the credit altogether.
Yeah. You know, about a little over a decade ago, I spent 6 years in southern Louisiana. And I can remember when we had these hurricanes that would be coming, it's not just the absolute sea level rise that people worry about, it's the storm surge that comes ahead of one of those tropical storms or hurricanes. And so sometimes those could have 6 or 10 or 15-foot swales that push inland. And so again, it's lots of different dynamics like that, the topography and kinds of things like that.
Exactly. And every location is so different, right? So you might have like a hurricane coming in, impacting the whole area, but not everywhere it's being impacted the same way.
Right.
Exactly. And this spatial analysis just helps you kind of analyze and you visualize and highlight, okay, all under the same like hurricane, but then this part of the town is actually being impacted even more.
Right.
And on top of that, we can play in a lot of these local contexts, right? What are the people living there, the demographics, right? The socioeconomics. And then you start to kind of, tell really cohesive story, like what is going on, who is actually being hurt, like, and then like how we can actually go about better like plan that to make sure everything is equitable and
Very cool stuff. Very cool stuff. It's amazing. Yeah, for sure. Okay, I want to shift gears for a second. I want to talk about this PIN partnership, right?
Yes.
You've been working with the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation, or PIN project, in the city of Savannah. And you've been mapping what we call social infrastructure, the physical locations of churches, libraries, community centers. How does identifying these hubs help a city like Savannah ensure that its future growth is equitable and inclusive for every neighborhood?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you asked this question. So I would like to acknowledge the support from the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation for making this very important community-driven research possible. And their support also enabled a strong collaboration with my colleague at Georgia Tech, Dr. Cleo Andres, and she is an expert in social networks and spatial analysis. And we also partner very closely with the city of Savannah and the Coastal Georgia Indicators Coalition, so to make sure that this research really grounded in the local priorities and reflects all the realities of the communities the city serves, right? So, and at its core, what we want to do is to understand how people socialize in Savannah. And does the city of Savannah provide enough social spaces for people to hang out? Because, cities function through these very specific places, like you mentioned, like parks, churches.
Playgrounds.
Exactly, playgrounds, and all these community centers. And do people feel comfortable going outside and to engage in meeting new people, build trust, have conversations? So this is like really important, and especially like in the post-pandemic Savannah, right? There is this broader goal of getting people out of their homes, and they can reconnect socially and engage in this whole like city life, and then kind of talk to each other, build trust, and then build memories together, right?
And back during the pandemic, that was the safe place to be, was outside, right?
Exactly.
Where we had the wind blowing and things like that. It was a place you could talk to people and still not have to worry about COVID transmission as much.
Right, exactly. So that's why we realize it's so important. Do we have enough places? And are those places being used by people? Are there any areas that the city of Savannah can do better, right? So because we build all these cities, so now we need to know like how, in terms of infrastructure use, how many people use that, and what are the things that we can do, right? And a lot of time, maybe you have a park nearby, but if that park actually doesn't have like the shade,
The amenities.
like
Yeah,
the amenities, or doesn't have safe access, so it doesn't really function as a social space for certain groups, right? So that's something that kind of very fundamental to this research. So what we went out is that we survey the Savannah residents and trying to understand their infrastructure use, right? So, and then how they feel about the cities, all these amenities. And another major thing is about accessibility. Even if we have all these social infrastructure exists, are they equally reachable for different communities? And that's a really important part of this geospatial analysis. So we actually calculated like the different transportation modes, like walking, biking, and driving, right? And we found that actually a lot of the neighborhoods, they're not even have a social space that they can walk within 5 minutes.
Or is there public transportation to get them there?
Exactly.
A bus route or something like that?
Right.
Yeah.
So do we have improved like transportation network to facilitate people getting out of the house and then to engage in like this social activities?
That's right.
Right. So that's a really important part. And then it's just like identifying which places they reported they spend a lot of time going out with, right? And then mapping them out, and you can suddenly see, oh, okay. And then you can tag along with how many people mention that spot, right? And then how many other places that maybe nobody mentioned, but they actually exist, and then quite really nice, actually. And what are some underlying factors that makes that place so unwelcoming or... Right. So basically, we build this what we call smart database to inventory all of these social spaces. So, and then we share with the community members. It's like an interactive map. So they can go on there, they can click in any whatever spot that they are interested in. They can see, okay, what do people say about that? And what issues people have with that, and what suggestions that they have, like all the residents have about that places they want the city planners to kind of address.
The biggest complaint I always have when I go to one of those parks is if the water fountain isn't working or the restrooms, right? They're like, oh no, I was counting on that to be there for my barbecue, you know? So, you know, something that comes to mind that's similar to that, I've heard in urban settings, there's a lot of mapping of food deserts.
Exactly.
So like, what does the access to the nearest grocery store look like where I can buy fresh produce or something like that?
Definitely,
Similar concept.
Yes, definitely a similar concept. And these are all important things, right? So that's how city actually thrive. We wanted people to be able to have a good quality of life and having all these easy access, and not just for one particular neighborhoods, but we want to make sure everyone, all members of the community can actually have the equal access to these places. So that's exactly, the idea.
Well, I want to drill down a little bit more on this. A major part of this human connection that you're talking about, people with places, is focused on mental well-being, which leads to your research in urban oases, so to speak, right?
Right.
And you found that green and blue spaces, I'm going to use Forsyth Park as an example, right? These aren't just a luxury for a city, but they're a necessity for public health. So what was the most surprising thing your models revealed about the specific qualities of a park and park needs that it actually needs to move the needle on community public health?
Great question. Yes, yeah. I guess what we found most surprising was that just having the green and blue spaces nearby was not enough. Not just because they're there, they're going to improve people's mental health, right? So in our models, we look at the how people are exposed to these different blue spaces and green spaces, and that matters a lot more, right? And if you can actually embed all of these amenities or these social infrastructures within their everyday life, if they can take it use in their everyday life, that matters the most, actually. And what we found is that, again, like, not a lot of people are actually living within that walking distance to all these like blue or green spaces, like the water features, right? So having a park nearby doesn't automatically mean that, wow, okay, it's great, because a lot of time we make this assumption like more nature, the best, like the better, right? But that's not always the case. It all in terms of how we intentionally design that amenity and to be kind of embedded across all the neighborhoods.
Yeah, and different people want different things out of that space. You might have a children's soccer team who wants to practice there, right?
Exactly.
But another people who want tranquility and they just want to sit there and have a picnic, right? And so it's sort of balancing those competing interests, I guess, right?
Right, exactly. And that kind of also connected a little bit also, and that project kind of continued through my Social Savannah project. So I want to talk a little bit also about that Social Savannah part of the thing, is that instead of just asking people where they go, but started asking where they go, who they go there with, and for what.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is to identify different relationship types. Do they have the specific infrastructure for them to hang out, right? So we have all these like children, families with young children, coworkers, friends, extended families, right? But sometimes if people wanted to just spend time with like their older relatives, a lot of time these spaces, they're relatively rare when you think about like for adult friends or coworkers. There are plenty of things downtown like restaurants, bars, cafes, and they can, they're abundant out there, and then they're easy to access. Whereas these other like social relationships, they're left unsupported. So, and maps helps us see, okay, there's a gap.
Yeah.
You have all these infrastructures, but then you also have these social relationships, they're not supported, right? So they help us see where the problem is and making sure that moving forward, the city can pay more attention to these groups that they are underserved.
Right.
Like, okay, so if you want to spend time with your grandma, do we have like low cost but also welcoming across all age group?
A ramp that could get
exactly
to
right.
Like
so
that,
for people, because the overall goal is to get everybody out.
That's right.
And to have conversations and to build community lives, right? So everyone can thrive in the city.
Oh,
so.
that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Thanks.
Well, I've got another series of questions I want to ask you here, and this relates to mentorship. I know you work very closely with a number of students. I want to start off this theme by just asking you, what mentor in your own life do you remember most, and why do you remember that person and their mentorship of you?
That's a very good question. I think that was my thesis advisor from my master's class.
Okay.
Like, my master program is that was my first time, like you switching from undergraduate, you just freshly graduated. And then you got into do serious research, right? And we travel, and that was the program that actually was supported by the National Science Foundation in China, is that we went outside to the field and we survey all the landscapes. And we also kind of take all the GPS locations. So, and then when we get back to the lab, so we sort of like mapping things out and then see all the things that we actually survey in the field and into the map to kind of visualize that. So I remember that advisor is that like some part you feel like, okay, this is like really strict, like, oh, you have to learn all these things. And there was this expectation because you are now not just like a college student.
Right.
You just graduated.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be more independent. Sure. But over time you're like, oh, okay, that's really for the best of my training that I go through this but originally it feels like, oh, okay, I was dumped on the things that I need to figure out, kind of navigate, but that's just like a process, right? And the same kind of in my own mentorship with my students now is that I kind of do something and my at the beginning they feel like, okay, this is really like strict, really harsh on me,
Right.
like, but it's a process.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
a learning process, right?
Absolutely.
So
Well, let's talk about one of those specifically. Now, your Urban Oases project, I think this was a collaboration with a graduate student, Oluwaseun Apide, is that
yes,
correct?
Olu, yes.
As a researcher, how does working with a student on such a human-centric topic change your approach? And do they ever bring a fresh perspective to the data that makes you familiar with the Savannah landscape in a new way?
Absolutely. Yeah. Working with these graduate student or the mentoring the graduate student is actually a big part of my research, right? And these graduate students, they coming in, again, they're really different than the undergraduate research systems. We have higher expectation out of them, right? So I see that as more of like a collaborative. They join your research group based on like the mutual research interest, right? So, but then they come on your research group, and then they kind of also have their own perspective, precisely their fresh perspective on this green and blue spaces. And they oftentimes ask really fundamental questions like, oh, why do we test this? You know, when you focus on your research for such a long time,
Right.
and you've been through all these literature, right? So it feels like natural, like, okay, this is just how we do that. This is just a procedure. You need to test that in order to move on. But by asking that question, despite really basic, but it makes you kind of step back and kind of rethink about your logic reasoning behind that.
Identifying some blind spots.
Exactly. You would think like so naturally, but they coming in, they were like, wow, this is new to me. Like why it's going through that way but not going the other way, right? And this is like really helpful because it helps like as the project progresses, we might want to pick up some of other analysis. It's just so natural and it's more of like a collaborative scholar dialogue, not just like, okay, I'm asking you to do this, to do A, B, C, or whatever, but more of we're progressing, we're changing, and we revisit our original research questions if we have to kind of revise a little bit and then refine that further to actually kind of fit into the whole bigger picture.
When you're working with these students, what's the number one lesson you want them to walk away with?
That's, again, really good question. Yes.
All of them, right?
All of them, right. I guess, especially in the geospatial technology field, is that I want them to walk away, first is to have a spatial perspective, right? So, and then the second thing is that you need to be very confident and knowing that I'm quite capable of doing this, doing meaningful research and to contribute meaningfully to your community, to the society, right? So with these technologies, you know, they actually update quite frequently. Like you can, when I learned GIS, I learned the ArcMap. But now we actually have this cloud-based ArcGIS. So I have to teach myself out of a lot of these like software updates or whatever. So I want them to walk away and having the ability to teach themselves all of these like a new
platforms, new versions.
Exactly, because the whole mechanism is the same, and then as long as you understand how that works, it's just similar, like right, and then also have the confidence, like okay, I can do this, I can solve this based on all my trainings, and we do offer all these like great courses to have them ready, right? And then we use all these industry standard software programs so that they can go on ready for their jobs, right? But again, sometimes it might seem a little bit discouraging, like, like this is different than what I learned. But that's part of the learning and being able to critically think like, okay, it's really similar. It's just some interface looks a little bit different than the original one that I'm learning. So having that confidence and thinking spatially and ethically about our surroundings. That's
I've often said faculty push students to achieve the very best that they can, right?
Right.
But I've also always sought students who push professors to be the best faculty that they can be. So it's a two-way street. And I was talking to some colleagues just the other day about mentorship. And this really great example was laid out in discussion. And it said, we oftentimes talk about mentoring junior faculty or students or things like that, but that's a two-way street. Those younger faculty, those younger students, they can also teach older folks about technology and, AI and
Absolutely.
new things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
the running joke is anytime you need to know how to do something on the newest iPhone, just ask somebody who's a teenager, right? Or in their 20s, and they'll know exactly how to use it.
Right. You're absolutely right in that. Yeah. So I see that as a learning process. You see them grow and yourself also grow. And then they bring in all these really fresh, and they are so young,
Yeah.
so energetic.
exactly.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's amazing to work with.
is.
And you learn a lot also
Yeah.
from them. Absolutely. And like the new perspectives they're bringing, and that's different from what you were thinking about that specific things. Yes.
Constantly
it's a
keeps the
two-way.
battery charged.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Well, listen, as we wrap up today, tell our listeners one unique fact about you that they would not learn simply from studying your research.
That's, again, really good question. Yes. Well, there are so many things. So, but I guess that's just a personal thing. I grew up in China. So, and it's kind of like in the southeastern part, really like tropical, subtropical climate type. So before I came to the U.S., I've never seen snow in my entire life.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And and when I first because I was fortunate to receive a scholarship to come to the U.S. to continue my graduate study, I'm really thankful on that. And the school is Miami University. So I bet a lot of people probably don't know it's in Ohio.
In Ohio, yes.
I thought actually it's in Miami. And I thought it's like such a smooth transition for me, right?
Yeah, warm and
Exactly. And until I booked the air tickets, I was like, what? That flies into Cincinnati.
Yeah.
But it turns out to be a great school. I'm really thankful for the training. But I have never seen snow. And then I'm so happy in Savannah that we actually had the snow.
2 years in a row.
Yes,
I mean, it's amazing.
exactly.
Yes,
So amazing.
It's crazy.
Yes.
Absolutely
Yeah.
crazy. Meimei, thank you so much for stopping
course.
by today and sharing a bit about your research with us. We truly appreciate your time. This has been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Yeah.
So until next time, I'm David Weindorf, and may your curiosity run as deep as the roots of research. And hail Southern.